Find a little RM out there.
So you can only label as RM when you own all the grapes to produce the champagne you make.
So you've got 5 different bottles in front of us.
Yes.
All examples of champagne?
All examples of champagne.
How is that colour created?
Champagne is actually pink, literally pink. Very small production, but it's absolutely delightful.
Where your favourite champagne of all time came.
Yeah, good memory.
Thank you.
That would be like, 8-9 grams, if you like, in champagne, between 0 and 12 grams of sugar.
I think when people think about champagne, they think it's a dry wine until they have a and they're like,
yeah.
Hello and welcome to Got Somme, where I want to say we kind of found our following, our audience, our community, you guys who are watching or listening to this through champagne. It's been some of our biggest content that we've ever posted, whether it be this or that, or our Olivier Krug interview. A lot of people, tens of thousands of people have come from that experience and those episodes. So whenever we get a chance to sort of focus in on our favorite type of bubbles, we definitely do. And Master Sommelier Carlos Santos, I just want to give you some credit. I come up with a lot of the concepts for Got Somme and sort of say to you, hey, here's what we're doing, natural wines.
You've always done that.
Yeah, but this one, you kind of said, I'd love to come in and do a bit of a masterclass on, champagne labels and comparative to Brut style, sparkling Prosecco's, etc. So I'm excited for you to lead this one and tell us what we're doing today.
Very good. So, I think, look, there's so many types of champagne and there's so many producers and, at the end, they all fermented into, second fermentation in the bottle. At the end, they all made the same way. But there's so many different styles and so many different ways you could go about a bottle of champagne that I think is interesting. And probably, it's easy to go on a bottle shop and just grab, a random bottle. But then what's exactly behind that particular bottle? So I think hopefully this will help a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. So you've got 5 different bottles in front of us.
Yes.
All examples of champagne?
All examples of champagne, and they overlap a little bit each. For example, there are 3 or 4 RM. There is 1 only NM. So for RM, there is 1 NM, which I will break down. Obviously, there is 2 Grand Crus. There is 2 Premier Crus. There is 1 Brut Nature, so all of those little things. There is 1 champagne that is made only from, is a white champagne made only from red grapes. So Blanc de Noir, and so that's what we're gonna.
Yeah, we've certainly spoken about RM and NM in the past.
Yeah, and Blanc de Noir and all of that. So
of course,
now on all in one episode.
But I guess this is like an updated version. As our audience has grown, a lot of people wouldn't have had the chance to see those episodes or go back that far into our catalogue. What I think, and I'll always remember, is RM and NM, which obviously we are going to cover, how much it can change the experience of the champagne in your bottle.
Yeah.
And I've dropped it a few times.
Yeah.
Not to be a wanker, but looking for like grower champagne.
Yeah.
I've dropped it that I'm looking for NM or RM.
Yeah.
In particular, when I've gone into a bottle shop or I've gone into, a wine store, and you can see the light come to light behind the person behind the counter's eyes.
As they, of course,
how often
have
is someone coming
much
in
more
saying
interest.
that?
Much more interest in recommending you something that they are passionate about. Probably not that they're not passionate about something NM. Which is exactly why I brought this bottle of wine. And we can actually start with that. So this Frederic Savard, and I just close the gap here, and we start with Frederic Savard. But this is, they produce just under 29,000 bottles. You would be thinking, okay, well, this is a RM because it's in fact, fairly small production. But this is actually an NM, so négociant manipulant, which means that they buy most of the grapes in to produce this champagne. So of course that can happen. They no matter how big or small you are, as soon as you buy most of the grapes to produce the champagne you make, then you are an NM. You're not allowed to, even if you only produce 2 barrels, 400 bottles, you still are an NM because you're buying the grapes in, right? Mm-hmm. So you can only label as RM when you when you own all the grapes to produce the champagne you make, right?
So that's when I talked about that grower champagne style. I'm looking for an RM, which means I'm looking for a champagne where the grapes are only grown within the vineyard.
Within the vineyard, and they owned by the same obviously by the producer.
And that's why the big champagne houses like Moët Chandon and Veuve Clicquot
and Renard and Tétanger and Boulanger and
to get the pure volume of the champagne that they need to be able to buy it from elsewhere.
And the consistency as well. Of course, it's consistency. You know, imagine if you have a non-vintage champagne that year on year and year you produce, you know, millions of bottles. Then in order to keep that consistency is having a huge amount of wine as almost like reserve, and every year they take small amounts of those reserve wines and they blend into a non-vintage.
It is funny around NM, you know, talking about Veuve Clicquot, for example, millions of bottles sold every single year.
Yeah.
But there is a mastery in the winemaker.
Yes, 100%.
Of having to match that same flavor every year because vintages are different. So they're not going to be able to get the same amount of volume from certain parcels they use each year. So that winemaker has to be tasting nonstop to try and get it to be the last year's exact same.
Well, there is a certain percentage of wine that you can use from the year of vintage, or you could use 100%. But of course, to keep consistency, they go into the reserve wine. So there is a certain percentage that you can use either way, as reserve or as young vintage, as the wine from the vintage to produce the non-vintage wines. So that's very, very interesting as well.
Because in the same way, like each year, you know, Krug, for example, famous for kind of having examples in their vintages to show how the year has changed rather than their Brut reserves.
Well, Krug is an NM, Krug is a Négociant Manipulant, but it's Krug is known for using, I think it's about 250 different wines to produce each bottle of Grand Cuvée. So you can imagine the blending that's going on to produce that one special cuvée every single year.
And I think
the Grand Cuvée.
We'll cross right now to our interview with Olivier, where he speaks about it being orchestral in its way that it's made.
Julie Caville, our cellar master, likes to describe herself as a music conductor. So she likes to say that each wine coming from different plot is the equivalent to a musician. And that every year with her team, and there are 7 people, 7 experts testing, we call the tasting committee at Krug, testing the wines, they will listen one by one to all these different musicians, which are as many wines coming from as many plots. And we have up to 300 every year. So because she says, I have to recruit the musicians that I will put on stage to play a new edition of the dream of the founder, that music offering the most generous music from Champagne. But nature being what it is, every year, especially in Champagne, is very different from the previous and the next one. So we have good years and bad years. And even within the good years, you have years which are led by classicism. You have years which are led by over-ripeness, but beautiful, charismatic. You have years which are more dull. You still have beautiful things, but they are more dull. But anyway, whatever the year, you have to recruit musicians to put on stage. So, for example, in a very classical year, you will easily find the top instruments, you know, those that you would recruit for Berlin Philharmonic Orchestra, for example. So you can fill some of the seats on stage, but there are still empty seats. You miss a trumpet, you may miss a triangle. As simple as it is extremely important. So this is when you go back to previous years where you've asked some of the musicians to stay, to be very patient, sometimes up to 15 years, until the day I call you back. So every year we will reinvite to the orchestra musicians from the past.
But what I find, you know, really interesting, to sort of just doubling down on what we've been speaking about, is that, you know, the 2024 vintage would have been so different to the 23 and the 22. So finding those blends from all of those reserves for all of the big houses.
250 wines. I mean, blended in.
It's amazing. It's amazing winemaking.
So yes, there's a lot of course, technique. There's a lot of knowledge. There's a lot of passion, of course.
Because Veuve drinkers, for example, they don't go to Veuve to find out what the vintage was doing and try and see how climate affected that year and yields were. No. They've gone for the same experience that they've always had.
Of course.
And so that consistency is really important to their brand.
Of course.
And of course they do vintages as well.
Laurent Perrier, Tétanger, Perrier Jouet, all those non-vintage that every single year taste exactly the
Exactly
same.
the same.
So that's how to keep consistency. That's the bread and butter. That's the bread and butter of a producer. So of course, then they have the single vintages, which we will touch on as well down the line with the last wine, where you have a wine from a single vintage. But anyway, we'll get there.
Yeah.
So yeah, Frederic Savard is négociant manipulant. He does have as well its domain, which I think is labeled as RM.
Okay.
But
Because they're using only their own fruit.
only their own fruit, but he has to come under a different brand, but I'm not even totally 100% sure. But
Oh,
yeah,
so that's interesting. So we've had this wine before on the podcast,
yeah.
but you're saying so you get
He has
a
to have a
label.
different. He has to have a different name though. It
right.
can't be exactly the same name because that's registered as one thing. So if you register,
so it doesn't register. So you can't have like.
Veuve Clicquot RM and Veuve Clicquot NM.
You can't.
No, you can't.
Oh,
have that.
so your
No,
winery is labeled as.
I never seen one. I did see some
wow.
producer that labeled RM, and with the time they may have start buying a lot more grapes in and start labeling as NM. So you can change, sure, but I don't think you can have both at the same time.
That's interesting. Yeah. So, but you can change the label, and
Yeah,
and
you
become
have to have
an RM vintage.
You have to have a all new RM producer type. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. For an example, like By Far
Yeah.
down in Geelong, some of the best Chardonnay and Pinot
Yeah.
in our country, also have Philippa Far. Now
Yeah.
that might be registered under a different trademark
Yeah.
and business, and
Yeah.
therefore, if that was single vintage, if this was champagne, which would,
Yeah.
obviously
Well,
they're not.
in Burgundy, you see that happening with, for example, where there is a domain, domain which is the vineyards that they own under their own brand. So, coming from generations and generations, or vineyards that they have purchased over the years. So they own all their vineyards. They label as domain. And then you have the négoce. Négoce will be the grapes that they buy in under a different label.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Very interesting. I did not know that. Very cool.
Yeah. So next we have Métis, Olivier Henriot. So this one is a noir and blanc, but this is made only from Pinots. So you know how Pinot Noir,
People
Pinot
think
Noir,
red
Pinot
skin.
Meunier, but there's also Pinot Blanc and Pinot Gris. So this one is made from Pinots, Blanc and Noir, which means that there's not only just the traditional Pinot Noir and Meunier in this wine. It could be as well Pinot Blanc and Pinot Gris.
Oh.
So those are grapes that are also used in Champagne. So Petit Meslier, Arbane, Pinot Noir, Pinot Meunier, Chardonnay. So there's in total 7 grapes that you can use in Champagne. Of course, Pinot Noir, Meunier, and Chardonnay are the ones that are widely used. And then the other 4 are very, very little used, rarely seen. Although there's a few producers that do use them. They will usually be labeled though differently. So that's what's interesting about this one.
So Pinot Noir grapes in a white champagne.
Pinot Noir, yeah. So they call it Pinots Noir and Blanc. So Pinot Blanc
Yeah, but I guess it's
could be
all,
Pinot Gris,
as we
which
know,
is
it's
white.
Okay, cool.
Pinot Gris is white. Pinot Blanc is white.
Yep.
Pinot Noir and Meunier are reds.
Yeah,
right?
but it's
So-
just about skin contact, right?
Yeah, soft pressing. So of course, soft pressing on the red grapes to extract just the juice, and the white wines normally.
So when we get a pink sparkling or pink champagne, how is that color created?
So through the pressing of the grapes.
Yeah, so no soft pressing. That's more hard pressing, extracting some of that skin
Yeah,
contact.
so in Champagne there is Rosé de Saignée, for example, which we have never had one, and that's another one that, thanks for bringing that in, because Rosé de Saignée is from the first pressing of the grapes, so it's like just a pure raw grape juice from Champagne, which is like really typically a lot more intense and typically very rarely seen. Is a very, very small producer, very small production, but it's absolutely delightful. L'Armandier Beignet is very, very good on it. And for example, that's one. But you see the color of the champagne. It's not like clean champagne. It's actually pink, literally pink. Very, very, very interesting. So that's Rosé de Saignée. But that's the first pressing. What's typically done with Champagne for a major production of rosé, is a soft pressing of Pinot Noir or Meunier typically, where you have a rosé champagne. Okay.
Well, there you go. We can have Pinot Noir, and that's why we see Pinot Noir quite common actually in Champagne, but it's not what people would expect.
Well, that's the term. So yeah, you have Blanc de Noir, which will be white champagne made from red grapes. And that's typically Pinot Noir and Meunier, or just Pinot Noir or just Meunier. And then you have Blanc de Blanc. So Blanc de Blanc will be a white wine made from whites. So that's only the whites, typically only Chardonnay. But yes, you could have small percentages or small amounts of Pinot Gris, Pinot Blanc, Petit Millier, Arban. But yeah, forget about that. That's just really, they exist. Some producers use it. In this case, this guy use it. Because otherwise, yes, it's Chardonnay, Blanc de Blanc. And then sometimes you have like other producers that will say 7 grapes or 7 cépages, which use the 7 of them. So there's one producer, I can't remember the name, but
it's like the Châteauneuf-du-Pape of
it's Châteauneuf-du-Pape of
Champagne.
Yeah, exactly. So that's that.
There you go.
And then this one, it's also a Brut Nature. So that's between 0 and 7 grams of sugar, where most producers, the non-vintage that we spoke about, Veuve Clicquot, Moët, Chandon, Boulanger, Tétanger, all those guys will be a Brut style. Why? Because it's where the most or the best balance is, if you like, in Champagne, between 0 and 12 grams of sugar. And that seems to be where everyone is the happiest with the 0 to 12 grams, is most consistent, is round, is textural, is toasty, biscuity, brioche, etc.
I think when people think about Champagne, they think, well, they don't maybe think, but they don't realize it's a dry wine until they have a Moscato, and they're like,
yeah. Brut in style means between 0 and 12 grams. So you could literally have something with 0 grams and still be labeled Brut. But why would you do that? So typically, a Brut style starts between 6 to 7 grams, and that's where most producers will be placing the champagne, 6 to 7 grams of sugar, and it's a huge difference. Believe it or not, if you have Brut Nature like this one, 0 grams of sugar versus something with 6-7 grams, it's a huge difference. You can taste like the level. You cannot taste sweetness per se, but you taste the texture, the richness is rounder on the Brut than on a Brut Nature, which is crisper, leaner, drier, and it's not necessarily less complex. Not at all. Actually, I find it more complex. It's just that the sugar, there's not that richness from the sugar. There's richness from other things. There's richness, for example, from late disgorgement. There's where the champagne ages longer on its lees, and then he adds that texture. So there's all different things. But then again, you can imagine that producing a champagne that is between less sugar, it's less appealing probably to a wider crowd than it is something with a little bit more sugar, where it's commonly known and everyone has tasted and everyone is happy. So it's like managing different productions, right?
Lovely. What's the third one?
So on the third bottle, Aiglioré, so one of my all-time favorite producers.
It's in your top 5, number 3, I believe.
Yeah. Always enjoy this champagne. This one is Extra Brut, for instance, so we've touched on that. So yeah, Brut Nature, which is 0 grams, and then Extra Brut, which is between 0 and 6 grams, and then anything above will be Brut. Yeah. So Extra Brut seems to be like incredibly seen these days, widely made, because again, a little bit drier. You feel a lot more the champagne, the brioche, the biscuity, the intensity of the champagne without having that richness from sugar. So yeah, this is important because there's 44 Premier Crus, so across 3 villages. So that's Côte de Blanc, Vallée de la Marne, and Montagne de Reims. Even though there's 2 further south regions, Côte de Bar and Côte de Cézanne, they do not hold any Grand Crus, but yeah, 44 Premier Crus and then 17 Grand Crus. And that's where the top Champagne arguably come from. Of course, the villages keep increasing around Champagne. There's more and more production. Actually, I think it was 5-6 years ago, probably a little bit longer, they increased the region or the villages where champagne could be produced.
Oh.
So eventually, maybe one day, some of them will, become Premier Cru. Some of them may become Grand Cru. But as it stands, it's 44 and 17, Premier Cru and Grand Cru. So yeah, this means that the fruit has come 100% from that particular Premier Cru. And that's it.
Does that mean that would be an RM then?
This is an RM, yes.
Yeah.
RM for Aigle-Laurier. So all the vineyards where he's producing the champagne are made in his own vineyards. Yeah. Next one, same situation with Paul Detune. So also an RM producer, but this one is a Grand Cru. So we've touched base on Grand Cru before. Actually, I strongly believe we opened a bottle of Paul Detune before in the podcast.
I don't think I've ever seen it. No.
No, yeah, very good. This one is rosé in this case, so 80% Pinot Noir, 20% Chardonnay. So it is made into a rosé wine, and it's from Ambonnet. So in this case, Grand Cru. Ambonnet is the southernmost Grand Cru of Montagne de Reims, and it's a top Pinot Noir.
Of course, where your favorite
spot.
champagne of all time comes from
Krug.
as well. Krug.
Claude Ambonnet. Claude Ambonnet, yeah.
Claude Ambonnet.
Yeah. Good memory.
Thank you. I actually saw a bottle of it in the flesh for the first time.
Where?
Society.
That would be like what, 8-9 grand?
I don't know.
No?
Yeah, Society's a restaurant in Melbourne, really good restaurant. Got a beautiful cellar, and I was just waiting in there before an event, and there was a bottle in the flesh for the first time.
Do you remember the vintage?
No.
There's not many. There's only like to date probably 5 vintages.
Crazy.
5 vintages since 1995. 1995 is the first vintage.
If you want us to open a bottle, please donate to.
Yeah.
So what is it about this rosé style champagne though that you wanted to focus on?
No, just being obviously a Grand Cru, Ambonnet, and it's extra brut style RM. So yeah, that's what it is. It's the only rosé on the lineup. So that's one day.
And finally, to focus on the only vintage.
Yeah, and then finally the vintage champagne. So which again, so for any non-vintage, the minimum required will be 12 months plus 3 months on aging before it comes to the market. With the vintage is 36 months. So that's 3 full years of aging before the wine comes out.
Pretty cool.
That's minimum requirement. So of course, it could be much longer. Some producers do much longer. Of course, the longer you age the champagne on its lees, the more texture, the more that toasty, brioche, biscuity, etc., etc.
And complexity.
From the same producer as the rosé, Paul Detune, which is as well RM. Could have NM vintage. For example, Dom Perignon is NM, but does vintage.
Oh, yes. That's what I was going to say, because I've been bidding at Grays.com to get, funnily enough, a 2012 Moët de Chandon just to talk about vintage champagne.
Yeah.
I bid a couple of times, been outbid, obviously, because we haven't done it on the show. But it's so funny because we are talking about like grower producers and producers showing off vintages, but that's what I was going back to the start of this podcast where I didn't know that you couldn't be both depending on what wine you're releasing. So Moët de Chandon can't be an RM because the house is NM.
Correct. The house is NM. So as Dom Perignon and Moët de Chandon, they can't. But
they do release vintages.
But they can release vintage because that doesn't mean that they buy the grapes in from other producers, doesn't mean that they are blending with other vintages. It just means it's from the same vintage. So
gotcha.
It's like,
so it still can be an NM example of 2012 of the region, but still multiple facets and packets.
Correct.
Doesn't have to be single vineyard. Still
buying all the wines from other producers. That's fine. That's not the issue. The issue is that they label all the wines from that particular year under that vintage.
Yeah.
Still NM, no problem. So it could be NM, could be RM. Doesn't matter.
That's great that you said that, because I would have thought I'm drinking an RM bottle from an NM winery. But really, I'm not. They could still be buying it from all over the shop.
The vintage, to label a vintage on the label, it doesn't mean NM or RM, nothing. RM, NM, or CM, other types of champagne producers, For example, a supermarket, Coles could label their own champagne under their own brand. So there's a code for that as well. Not CM, not RM, not NM. It's something else. But let's not even go there now. The important
we don't
now
need to
is
talk about Coles wine. We've got these champagnes on there.
Yeah, of course. But so you have Dom Perignon, which wants to do vintage champagne. Just means that every wine that they are buying, they will label under the 2012 vintage. They're still NM, doesn't matter.
But yeah, I guess my point to that is
So
that
RM,
even if they were to get like Dom Perignon, for example, who are NM,
they are NM,
right?
yeah.
So even if they were to get their own single vineyard sites,
Yeah, they would
for
have.
one vintage,
Yeah, if they label like
it's still an NM. They can't change that label.
yeah,
They could
so
do it under another
it's,
label.
It's
but
like Krug is interesting because Clos d'Ambonnet, they own that particular vineyard, Clos d'Ambonnet and Clos de Menil. So technically, that could be an RM.
yeah, but they
But-
can't change the labeling because they're an NM.
Because they are labeling under Krug. Krug, they buy a lot of grapes. Unless they put that under a different name,
Yeah.
then they could do RM. But it could not be Krug. Could be
Yeah. Interesting. Because okay. Love that. So when I was buying, of course, really good learning as well, because I've been trying to buy vintage champagnes thinking these are going to be expressions of single vineyard sites from these producers.
This is the one that I would say is the most RM producer in the table. But
You
it's
are
not,
looking at
it's an
Frederic Savard.
Frederic Savard, but it's not. It's an NM because he buy the grapes in to produce this champagne.
Gotcha. But it still
So-
does taste the most unique and complex on a scale of
is
27,000 bottles versus millions.
correct. Yeah. So yes, it just means that he buys the grapes to produce this.
Yeah.
It's not coming from his family. It's not. He didn't buy He didn't buy the lands where he actually makes the wine. He buys the grapes,
Yeah.
or he buys the grapes, or buys the juice, or buys the must. So there's all of that. It doesn't have just to be.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Love that. Well, I learned something today. If you did too, can you please leave us a comment, whether this is on YouTube or Spotify or on our Instagram? Make sure you come and let us know what you learned from this, because Carlos, we've done a fair bit of champagne content and that just blew my mind. On the next episode of Got Somme, we are back with another blind wine tasting on our YouTube only. Make sure you subscribe over there. If you have any ideas of what you want us to cover on this show, we are, of course, nothing without you guys watching or listening. Please drop us a DM on Instagram. And we want to thank you for over 20,000 people on TikTok now. 65,000 on Instagram and 20,000 on TikTok. So we're very appreciative of however you found us and listened to us or watch us. So until the next episode, salud to you, and let this be your excuse to pop a nice bottle. Find a little RM out there. Good job, brother.